Hello, I'm Mariam Mashiri, and this is the Iran War Today, our daily briefing bringing you up to date with all you need to know on day 53 of the US-Israel war with Iran. Over the course of the next 10 minutes or so, we'll get the latest from our teams across the world. We'll be live with Gary O'Donoghue in Washington and with Azadeh Mashiri in Islamabad. Let's start, though, with some of today's key developments. President Trump says he expects to be bombing Iran if no progress is made in peace talks, and he doesn't want to extend the ceasefire due to expire soon.
Well, I expect to be bombing because I think that's a better attitude to go in with, but we're ready to go. I mean, the military is raring to go.
There's no confirmation that talks will go ahead in Islamabad. JD Vance is still in Washington, whilst Iran is yet to decide if it will go.
So far, no decision has been made. And I think the reason is very clear, because of the confusing messages we have been receiving from the United States.
China's president calls for the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz for the first time since the war began. And petrol thefts in the UK surge as the war pushes up fuel costs. They're up 62% compared with a year ago. Well, let's start with those comments from President Trump. He says that he believes the US is in a very strong negotiating position with Iran, but expects to be bombing if progress is not made in Iran's peace talks. Well, time is running out before a temporary ceasefire between the United States and Iran ends. It's still unclear whether the talks in the Pakistani capital, Islamabad, will go ahead. The White House says US Vice President JD Vance, who's expected to lead the delegation, has not yet left Washington. Well, Iranian state television said no delegation from Iran had gone to Islamabad. A spokesman told the BBC Iran was yet to decide on whether to go. The Iranian parliamentary speaker did say Tehran is preparing new cards on the battlefield if fighting with the US resumes. Well, both Iran and Pakistan, which is playing a key mediation role, say the truce will end within the next few hours. But President Trump has suggested that it expires on Wednesday evening, Washington time. Let's take a look now at some of what President Trump told CNBC when he spoke to them on the phone.
What I think is that we're going to end up with a great deal. I think they have no choice. We've taken out their Navy. We've taken out their Air Force. We've taken out their leaders, frankly, which does complicate things in one way, but these leaders are much more rational. It is regime change, no matter what you want to call it, which is not something I said I was going to do, but I've done it, indirectly maybe, but I've done it. And I think we're in a very strong negotiating position to do what other presidents should have done during a 47-year period.
Well, let's cross live to Islamabad and speak to our South Asia correspondent, Azadeh Mashiri. Azadeh, what are we hearing about whether or not these talks are actually going to go ahead?
Well, we've heard that the Iranian delegation was prepared to come to the negotiating table, was going to travel to Islamabad, but that the moment that the United States fired on an Iranian-flagged cargo vessel is when everything changed. That's what an Iranian source told me earlier. Now, that episode happened just days before these talks were due to happen. And the White House may have thought that this would add some pressure to the Iranians at the negotiating table, but instead, Mariam, we're seeing that neither delegation is here in Islamabad, and that ceasefire is now due to expire with no word on whether it will be extended. And remember, after weeks of war, of brute force, the United States didn't get the immediate political and military concessions that it was expecting from the Iranians. And now here in Pakistan, the information minister has, in a social media post, said that the mediators are still trying to convince the Iranians to travel here, and that's an acknowledgement, a formal acknowledgement of the fact that the Iranians are so far not showing any signs that they are going to travel here to Islamabad. So, Mariam, if we weren't sure whether these talks were going to happen before, we're now very clear that they're up in the air.
Azadeh, thank you very much. Well, let's get the view now from Iran. Our chief international correspondent, Lyse Doucet, is allowed to report from Tehran on condition none of her material is used on the BBC's Persian service. This is her assessment of whether the Iranians will attend any talks.
We just got back from Iran's foreign ministry, saw no sign there of any delegations preparing to travel. We were told that the foreign minister, Abbas Araghchi, and his close aides were locked in meetings behind closed doors. They were still exchanging, you can imagine, frantic messages through the mediators. So we sat down with the senior foreign ministry official, Ismail Baghaei. He had been at the last round of talks in Islamabad, and asked him what was the situation now.
So far, no decision has been made. And I think the reason is very clear, because of the confusing messages we have been receiving from the United States.
Confusing messages, he said, and that includes those posts from President Trump threatening military action. Also the situation in the Strait of Hormuz, where for the first time the U.S. Navy fired on, boarded and seized an Iranian vessel. But I put it to him that President Trump said it's Iran which is violating the ceasefire by not opening that strategic strait. And he pointed out that last week they did announce the strait would be open on routes coordinated by Iran. But then President Trump immediately announced thank you in capital letters and said their U.S. naval blockade would stay in force. So the two sides locked in disagreement while the clock is ticking down. On Iranian time, the ceasefire should expire in a number of hours.
Lyse Doucet there. Well, the Chinese President Xi Jinping has called for the opening of the Strait of Hormuz for the first time since the closure of the vital energy passageway. Speaking by phone to Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, President Xi said the Strait of Hormuz should remain open for normal passage, which aligns with the common interest of countries in the region and the international community. Our China correspondent Stephen McDonnell has this assessment of what was said by President Xi.
Well, it's not so much the lines that are important, because in a way this is what the Chinese government, via its various spokespeople, has been saying throughout. That there needs to be discussion, there needs to be a respect for everyone's sovereignty with a view to reopening the Strait of Hormuz to normal shipping traffic. The difference is that it's Xi Jinping saying it this time in a conversation with the Saudi Crown Prince. Now, in that conversation, or at least from the readout we get from that conversation, he wasn't blaming anyone directly, but in the past, the Chinese government has said that this really is all the US and Israel's fault for starting this war, and that they're the ones who should be taking the main initiative to ease off on all of the hostilities. Interestingly, from the Saudi side, we had the Crown Prince saying that China and Saudi Arabia should work together to find a pathway to lasting peace and stability in the region. Now, some are interpreting that as possibly him hinting to Xi Jinping that perhaps Beijing could be doing more to lean on Iran to get the strait opened. But there is an element of tea leaf reading in this, because this is all this diplomatic speak that we're trying to unpack.
Well, here in the UK, the Chancellor Rachel Reeves has today said that economically Britain was well placed if the conflict continued. But the price of petrol and diesel has risen quickly in the last 6 weeks since the start of the Iran war. Independent petrol retailers have told the BBC they've seen a big rise in petrol theft. Simon Browning has more.
£151 stolen by this white van. Blatant, unashamed. £110 stolen here. The youngster fills up before an adult drives off. Fuel prices have rocketed since the war in Iran disrupted the global flow of oil. They've stabilised in recent days, but everyone is paying more. In Coventry, just after meeting forecourt owner Paul, petrol theft again.
I don't know what, he's already got 36 on there.
A few moments of confusion.
It ain't been a drive-off, has it?
Then reality dawns.
Drive-off? Is that a drive-off?
Yep.
Is that a regular thing?
So this week so far, it's been one a day.
Paul's now bought new theft tech to combat losses.
Yeah, well, we get hit inside and outside the shop. So, people are stealing the fuel on the forecourt and then they're stealing the products inside the shop as well.
Josh has 5 garages in the south of England. He didn't want to show his face as staff abuse has risen.
They've been accused of profiteering. They've had people, calling them thieves, shouting at them. It's quite intimidating for these guys. We're probably at 5 drive-offs per site per week now, whereas historically it was probably 1 to 2.
Retailers like Josh feel in a trap. People are stealing, they're also saying they can't pay for it. And far from making more profits, people are buying less fuel, so takings are down. Petrol retailers and their trade body say a surge in abuse is linked to claims drivers are being ripped off. The government said thieves must face the full force of the law, and abusing people at work is unacceptable. Simon Browning, BBC News.
Well, to finish, let's take stock of where we think President Trump is and what he might do next. Live now to our chief North America correspondent, Gary O'Donoghue. And Gary, just talk us through, first of all, the likelihood of JD Vance, the Vice President, actually making that journey to Islamabad. What are we hearing?
Well, he hasn't left yet, so time is running out in terms of the deadline for the end of the ceasefire, sometime tomorrow night, Wednesday evening, local time in the US. And we're hearing unconfirmed reports at the moment, anonymous sourced reports from American media that the trip is on hold, as it's described, that there is a pause because they haven't had a satisfactory response, they say, from the Iranians in terms of what they're prepared to talk about. These reports say that the trip hasn't been cancelled at this stage, so we seem to be in this kind of limbo where they won't get on the plane unless they think there's a reasonable chance, A, that the Iranians will show up in Islamabad, and B, that they will be prepared to talk substantively. But even if that happened in the next 5 minutes, there's still going to be a very limited amount of time. You know, it's a 14, 15, 16-hour flight from here to Islamabad. So they wouldn't get there until, tomorrow morning, effectively, Wednesday morning. So a lot of uncertainty at the moment, a lot of uncertainty about whether there's anything to talk about, and that deadline that's already been extended by a day by the president, and him saying he's not really minded to extend it any further.
And him also saying that if he doesn't get some sort of agreement, then he's happy to start bombing Iran again. What is the mood in Washington now, given all of this rhetoric that we're hearing from the president and the fact that Mr. Vance hasn't even started that journey yet?
Well, I think there's a lot of frustration around because the tough talk, if you like, the kind of we'll bomb even more, we'll destroy infrastructure, we'll target other stuff that's been mentioned by the president, bridges, roads, etc. That doesn't seem to be bringing Iran any closer to the table. Taking that oil tanker off Sri Lanka may have been aimed at trying to persuade them to come to the table. That doesn't seem to have worked either. And at the same time, there's this problem, this political problem, that whenever you set time limits and deadlines, that if you don't stick to them and you don't follow through on them and nothing substantive happens, then you can end up looking weak. And that is the last thing this president is prepared to do, which is end up looking weak. So there's a lot coming together here, a critical moment in this conflict where hostilities could break out all over again and things could get an awful lot worse. But there doesn't seem to be like there's a coming together of minds on any of the substantive issues, namely the opening of the strait, of course, that crucial artery out of the Gulf into the Arabian Sea and the wider world, and then the question of Iran's ability to enrich uranium for nuclear purposes and whether or not they really do want to bomb and all that kind of thing. So there's no movement here by the look of it.
Gary, thank you. Well, whether you're joining us on YouTube, TikTok, Sounds, radio or TV, thank you for your time. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow with the Iran War Today.